My name is Beatrice Holloway. For 40 years, I was an art historian, a woman who taught students how to read the stories hidden in a painting's layers, the underdrawing, the pentimenti, the subtle shifts in color. I understood that the surface of a masterpiece often conceals a different, sometimes darker, truth beneath. I never imagined that my own family would become a canvas for such a terrible deception. In the final, agonizing months of my husband Arthur's life, as he lay dying in our home in Charleston, a house soaked in history and memory, my sons, James and Samuel, began to pressure me to sell it. They spoke of investments, of securing the future, their words a constant, gentle assault on my grief. They saw a grieving, exhausted old woman, an obstacle to their ambition, not knowing that my brilliant, dying husband, a man they had fatally underestimated, had seen everything. They did not know that in his final, lucid moments, he had left me a letter, a final, secret masterpiece that would serve as the underdrawing to their lies, exposing the dark and greedy truth of their betrayal. Before the whispers about money began, our house was a sanctuary of sorrow. It is a historic Charleston single house, long and narrow, with wide, shaded piazzas that catch the humid Atlantic breeze. Its rooms are filled with books, art, and 45 years of our shared life. But now, it had become a hospice. My husband, Arthur, a brilliant and beloved history professor at the College of Charleston, was dying. The diagnosis of aggressive pancreatic cancer 6 months prior had been a death sentence, and we were now living out its final, agonizing clauses. Our world had shrunk to the quiet confines of the master bedroom on the second floor, its French doors opening onto the piazza, letting in the sweet, heavy scent of jasmine and magnolia. The rhythm of our days was dictated by medication schedules, by the gentle hum of the oxygen concentrator, and by the long, quiet hours I would spend sitting by his bedside, holding his hand, reading to him from his favorite poets as he drifted in and out of a morphine-induced haze. Arthur was the love of my life, my intellectual partner, my anchor. In those final months, the love between us deepened into something fierce and elemental. We spoke little, but our communication was profound. A lifetime of understanding distilled into a shared glance, a squeeze of the hand. I was losing him piece by piece, and the grief was a constant, physical weight in my chest. My only focus was on making his final journey as peaceful and as full of love as I possibly could. I was his sole caregiver, a role I embraced with every fiber of my being. I was exhausted, heartbroken, and completely, utterly distracted. It was the perfect environment for a conspiracy to take root. Our sons, James and Samuel, began to visit more frequently as their father's condition worsened. At first, their presence was a comfort. James, the elder, was a successful, ambitious financial manager from Atlanta, and he brought with him his wife, Victoria, a woman of sleek, polished elegance and formidable charm. Samuel, our younger son, was a gentle, artistic soul, a high school art teacher from right here in Charleston, who was more easily swayed, his heart always on his sleeve. They would arrive with groceries and prepared meals, their faces masks of loving concern. Victoria, especially, was a whirlwind of terrifying efficiency. She would organize the medical bills, speak with the hospice nurses, and manage the schedules, all with a brilliant smile and a voice that was pure, liquid sympathy. "Beatrice, you are a saint," she would say, her hand on my arm. "But you cannot do this all alone. You have to let us help. You have to let us take some of the burden." I was so grateful. In my grief and exhaustion, her competence felt like a lifeline. She seemed to be the strong, practical presence our family so desperately needed. She and James would sit with me at the kitchen table, their faces etched with worry, and talk about the future. "We are just so worried about you, Mom," James would say, his tone heavy with sincerity. "Once Dad is gone, this house is so big. The expenses, the upkeep, it is too much for one person." Samuel would nod in agreement, his eyes full of a genuine, sorrowful concern that I now know was expertly manipulated. "We just want to make sure you are safe and secure," he would murmur. They were laying the groundwork, carefully and methodically, planting the seeds of my own incompetence and the house's impossibility. They were not just visiting their dying father, they were vultures, circling, patiently waiting for the moment to strike. The first direct strike came on a gray Tuesday afternoon. Arthur was sleeping upstairs, a rare moment of peace. The four of us were at the kitchen table. Victoria, who had brought a file of official-looking documents with her, laid them out with the air of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. "I know the timing is terrible," she began, her voice a low, respectful murmur, "but an opportunity has come up that is simply too good to ignore. It is a once-in-a-generation private equity deal, a fund investing in emerging green technologies. The initial investors stand to see a return that is, frankly, astronomical." She passed around a glossy prospectus filled with charts and projections that were as impressive as they were incomprehensible. "The problem," James continued, picking up the thread seamlessly, "is that the buy-in is substantial, and the window of opportunity is very small. We have some capital, but not enough to get in on the ground floor." I stared at them, confused. "What does this have to do with us?" Victoria leaned forward, her eyes full of a deep, convincing sincerity. "Beatrice," she said, her voice dropping, "we have been looking at the numbers. The experimental treatments for Arthur, the ones the insurance will not cover, have drained your savings. After he is gone, your pension alone will not be enough to maintain this house. You will be financially vulnerable." "We can secure all our futures," James said, his voice rising with excitement. "Yours, ours, Samuel's. This is not just an investment, it is a lifeboat. It will generate enough income for you to live in any luxury you choose, without ever having to worry about money again. And," he added, delivering the masterstroke, "it would create a legacy that Dad would be so proud of." The silence that followed was heavy. Then Samuel, the gentle, emotional son, spoke, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed plea. "Think about it, Mom. It's a way to turn this horrible situation into something positive. It is a way to make sure something good comes from all this pain." The proposal was as breathtaking as it was obscene. They were asking me to sell my home, the sanctuary where their father was dying, to fund a speculative tech deal. My refusal was instant and absolute. "No," I said, my voice shaking with a quiet fury. "This is your father's home. We are not selling it. We are not discussing this again." But they were prepared for my resistance. What followed was a relentless campaign of psychological warfare, and their primary weapon was love. "Mom, we are only doing this because we love you," James would say, his face a mask of wounded sincerity. "We cannot stand by and watch you struggle financially in a few years. It would be a betrayal of Dad's memory not to protect you. We just want to take care of you the way you have always taken care of us," Samuel would plead, his eyes filling with tears. Victoria was the most effective. She would frame my refusal as a symptom of my grief. "Of course you are emotional right now, Beatrice," she would say, her voice a soothing balm of poison. "You are not thinking clearly. Your attachment to the physical house is understandable, but it is not logical. It is preventing you from seeing the big picture, the one that guarantees your security." They were a united front, their arguments a constant grinding pressure. They made me feel selfish, as if my love for my home and my husband's memory was a foolish, sentimental indulgence that was jeopardizing the family's future. They were experts at making a reasonable position feel like an act of irrational cruelty. My exhaustion was their ally. Every day I had a little less energy to fight, a little less strength to resist their circular, manipulative logic. The only person who seemed to understand was Arthur. Though he was often lost in a fog of pain and medication, there were moments of startling, heartbreaking lucidity. During these moments, his eyes, though sunken, were as sharp and intelligent as ever. He could not speak much, his voice a dry rasp, but he would listen from his bed as their voices drifted up from the kitchen. One afternoon, after a particularly draining argument with them, I came back into the bedroom, my spirit bruised and battered. Arthur was awake, and his eyes were fixed on my face. He reached for my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "No," he whispered, the single word a monumental effort. "My house." Tears streamed down my face. "I know, my love. I know. I will not let them." He squeezed my hand again, a look of profound, desperate warning in his eyes. He saw Victoria for exactly what she was. He saw the greed in James's eyes. He saw the weakness in Samuel's. He was a silent, helpless witness to the betrayal of his own sons. These brief moments of connection with him were my only solace. They were a reminder that I was not crazy, that my instincts were right, but they were fleeting. Most of the time, he was asleep, and I was left alone to face the siege. The strain of it was immense. I was a caregiver, a grieving wife, and a lone defender of my home, and the walls were closing in. In the final week of Arthur's life, the pressure became unbearable. His decline was rapid, and with it, their urgency grew. They began to speak of the investment's deadline. They brought a real estate agent to the house for an informal appraisal while Arthur was asleep upstairs. The intrusion felt like a sacrilege, a desecration of our final, precious days together. I felt myself starting to break. My resolve, eroded by weeks of emotional blackmail and sheer exhaustion, was crumbling. I began to have moments of profound self-doubt. Were they right? Was I just a sentimental old woman clinging to bricks and mortar while a golden opportunity slipped away? My love for my sons was a deep, instinctual thing, and the idea that I was standing in the way of their future was a torment. The breaking point came one evening. I was in the kitchen, and I overheard James and Samuel arguing on the piazza. "We have to make her sign," James was saying, his voice a low, angry hiss. "The deadline is Monday. Victoria has everything lined up. But Dad is—" Samuel's voice was choked with emotion. "He is barely holding on. It feels so wrong." "What is wrong is leaving Mom with nothing but this money pit of a house," James shot back. "Victoria's plan will set us all up for life. Dad would want this. Now, are you with us or not?" There was a long, terrible silence, punctuated only by the chirping of the cicadas in the warm night air. "I am with you," Samuel finally whispered, the words a confirmation of his total capitulation. I leaned against the counter, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. They were going to do it, with or without my blessing. I had lost. I felt a wave of utter, hopeless defeat wash over me. That night, for the first time, I seriously considered giving in, just to make it all stop, just to have a few final days of peace with my husband without the constant grinding conflict. I did not know that Arthur, in his silent, watchful lucidity, had already prepared his final, brilliant countermove. The dam of my resistance, eroded by weeks of relentless pressure, had finally broken. The night I overheard my sons sealing their pact was the night I surrendered in my heart. A profound, bone-deep weariness settled over me, a grief so total it left no room for fight. My only remaining desire was for peace, a few final, quiet days with my husband, undisturbed by the ugly clamor of greed. The end for Arthur came with a quiet, gentle grace that he had always embodied. It was a Sunday morning. The house was still, the early light filtering through the old wavy glass of the bedroom windows. Sunday, September 28th, 2025. I will forever see that date etched not in a calendar but in my soul. James, Victoria, and Samuel were downstairs, a funereal quiet having finally fallen over them, as the hospice nurse had warned that the end was near. I was alone with Arthur. He had been unconscious for most of the past 24 hours, but suddenly his eyes opened. They were startlingly clear and lucid. The fog of pain and medication momentarily lifted. He looked at me, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. He could not speak, but he squeezed my hand, the one he had held for nearly 50 years. With a surge of effort that seemed to take all his remaining strength, he used his other hand to weakly pat the top of his bedside table, his gaze fixed on a small, ornate wooden box, where he kept his old university keys and cufflinks. His eyes then met mine, and they were filled with a desperate, urgent meaning. He patted the box again, a silent, emphatic command. Then he whispered a single, dry, rasping word. "Fight!" A moment later, a quiet sigh escaped his lips, a final, gentle release, and he was gone. The love of my life, my partner, my anchor had slipped his moorings and drifted out on a silent tide, leaving me utterly alone on the shore. I laid my head on his chest, the silence of his stilled heart a roar in my ears, and I wept. In my profound grief, the memory of his final gesture, his final word, was a confusing, distant echo, its true meaning lost in the overwhelming sorrow of the moment. Grief is a disorienting fog. The world becomes a muffled, distant place, your own movements slow and dreamlike. The days following Arthur's death were a blur of necessary, painful tasks, calling family, arranging the funeral, choosing a casket. My sons and Victoria took charge. Their efficiency, a cold, sharp intrusion into my soft, enveloping sorrow. They did not wait long. They did not even wait until their father was in the ground. 2 days after his death, as I was sitting at the kitchen table trying to choose a photograph for the memorial service, James and Victoria sat down opposite me. "Mom," James began, his voice a careful, somber tone he had likely practiced. "I know this is the worst possible time, but we have to be practical. The deadline for that investment is approaching. The real estate agent needs to get the house listed this week to take advantage of the market." I stared at him, my mind unable to process the sheer, callous indecency of his words. "Your father just died," I whispered. "And he would want us to be smart," Victoria cut in, her voice smooth as polished stone. "He would want you to be secure. Arthur was a practical man. He would not want sentimentality to jeopardize your future. This is what he would have wanted, Beatrice, to know you are taken care of." They were using him. They were twisting my husband's memory into a cudgel to beat me into submission. They were using my grief as a tool, my emotional vulnerability as an opportunity. Samuel, his eyes red-rimmed from his own genuine sorrow, was their most effective weapon. "Mom, they are right," he said, his voice choked with tears. "Dad is gone. We have to think about what is next. We have to stick together. Please, let us just get this done. For him." For him? The words were a profanity, but in the fog of my grief, I could not find the strength to fight. I was exhausted. I was outnumbered. And my spirit, the fiery, resilient core of me, had been extinguished by Arthur's last breath. The day of the funeral was a gray, somber affair. Friends and colleagues from the university filled the old church, their faces a sea of sympathy. My sons and their wives sat beside me in the front pew. To the outside world, we were a perfect portrait of a grieving, supportive family. It was a beautiful, masterful lie. The day after, Victoria arrived with a thick stack of documents and a notary. "It is better to get this all over with at once," she said, her voice full of a gentle, false compassion. "So you can focus on healing." She spread the papers across the dining room table. There were real estate listing agreements. There were forms authorizing her and James as agents on my bank accounts. There were documents formally establishing a family trust, with James and Victoria as the primary trustees and me as a beneficiary. A legal status that sounded generous but was, in fact, utterly powerless. I did not read the fine print. I did not have the energy. I did not have the will. What was the point? The house was just a collection of wood and nails without Arthur in it. The money was just paper. The fight had gone out of me. All I wanted was for the pressure to end. All I wanted was to be left alone with my sorrow. I picked up the pen and I signed everything they put in front of me. With each stroke of my signature, I could feel myself giving away another piece of my life, of the future Arthur and I had planned together. It was a slow, methodical dismemberment of my independence. When it was done, Victoria gathered the papers into her briefcase with a crisp, efficient snap. "Thank you, Beatrice," she said, patting my hand. "You have done the right thing. You will see. Now the healing can begin." After they left, I sat alone in the deafening silence of the house. The fog of grief began to lift, replaced by the cold, clear, and horrifying reality of what I had just done. I had betrayed Arthur. In my weakness, I had allowed his legacy, our legacy, to be handed over to the very people he had tried to warn me against. The pain of that realization was a new and sharper grief, a self-inflicted wound that felt deeper and more shameful than any other. I had not just lost my husband, I had lost myself. The weeks that followed were the lowest of my life. The for sale sign was hammered into the front lawn, a garish public declaration of my defeat. Victoria and James managed everything. Their phone calls to me brief and informational, filled with updates on offers and closing dates. I was a spectator in the dismantling of my own life. My days were spent in the painful, necessary task of sorting through 45 years of memories, deciding what to keep, what to sell, what to give away. It was during this process, in the quiet, dusty confines of Arthur's home office, that I found it. I came across the small, ornate wooden box from his bedside table. I had packed it away on the day he died, my mind too clouded to register his final, desperate gesture. Now, I opened it. Inside, nestled amongst his old cufflinks, was a single, unfamiliar, antique-looking key. I remembered his last word. Fight. And I remembered his eyes, urging me toward this box. The key did not fit any of the locks in the house. I tried them all. Then, a memory surfaced. His old roll-top desk at the university, the one he had been allowed to keep in his office after he retired. We had moved it into storage after his diagnosis. The next day, I took a taxi to the storage unit. The desk sat in the corner, shrouded in a white sheet like a ghost. The key slid into the lock of the bottom drawer with a smooth, satisfying click. The drawer was empty, save for a single thick, cream-colored envelope. On the front, in Arthur's familiar, elegant script, now shaky but unmistakable, were the words, "For Beatrice, to be read only after I'm gone, and only when you are ready to fight." My hands trembled as I broke the wax seal. Inside were a dozen pages, filled with his handwriting. It was his last lecture, his final, brilliant piece of historical analysis, and the subject was the betrayal of his own family. He had written it in his final weeks, in those brief, lucid moments between the waves of pain and medication. He detailed everything he had seen and overheard from his sickbed. He wrote of his profound, heartbreaking disillusionment with his sons, of James's naked ambition, and Samuel's tragic weakness. He wrote of Victoria, of the cold, predatory calculation he saw in her eyes, calling her a modern-day Borgia, using charm and finance instead of poison and a dagger. He had done his own research. Using his university access, he had looked into the investment they had proposed, and he laid out in meticulous detail how it was a fraudulent shell company, a classic Ponzi scheme designed to bilk investors. He had even, in his last days, made a secret phone call to a trusted friend, a retired forensic accountant who had confirmed his suspicions. The letter was a masterpiece of evidence, a detailed first-hand account of their conspiracy. It was his final, loving act of protection. The letter ended with a plea that was like a clarion call to my defeated soul. "My darling Beatrice," he wrote, "I am leaving you. But I am not leaving you defenseless. They have underestimated you. They have always underestimated you. They see a grieving wife, a sentimental mother. I have always seen the brilliant, strong woman I married. Do not let them take our home. Do not let them tarnish our life's work. It is not just about the money, it is about the truth. I have given you the map. Now you must fight the battle. Do not let them win, my love. For me, fight." I sat on a dusty crate in the cold, silent storage unit for over an hour, reading and rereading the letter. The words were a powerful antidote to the poison of grief and self-doubt that had infected me. Every sentence was a confirmation of my own instincts, a validation of the suspicions I had been made to feel were a form of madness. I was not crazy. I was right. The fog of despair that had enveloped me for weeks was burned away by a clean, righteous, and liberating fury. The grief for Arthur was still there, a profound ache that would never truly leave, but it was no longer a weight that held me down. It was now a source of strength, a fire in my soul. My husband's final act on this earth was to arm me for the war to come. I walked out of the storage unit and into the bright sunlight, a different woman than the one who had entered. The defeated, heartbroken widow was gone. In her place stood an art historian who had been given her final, most important commission, to restore a masterpiece, the truth of our lives, which had been painted over with the cheap, ugly varnish of their greed. I got into the taxi, the letter a warm, heavy weight in my purse. I looked at the "for sale" sign on my lawn not with despair, but with a cold, clear resolve. This was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the fight, and for the first time in a very long time, I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was going to win. The morning after I found Arthur's letter, the world looked different. The familiar rooms of my home were no longer just containers of memory and grief. They were a battlefield. The "for sale" sign on the lawn was not a symbol of my defeat, but a declaration of war from the enemy. Arthur's final words, "fight," were a command that had reignited a part of my soul I thought had died with him. I knew my first move had to be to contact the lawyer he had named, Marcus Thorne. But I was under constant, benevolent surveillance. A direct call would be too suspicious. I needed a pretext, a move that would fit the character of the broken, sentimental woman they believed me to be. I found my opportunity that afternoon. James and Victoria were in the kitchen, discussing the offer they had received on the house. I shuffled in, clutching a stack of old mail, my face a mask of weary confusion. "James, dear," I began, my voice frail. "This is all so complicated. The sale papers, the title transfer. Your father always handled these things. I feel I should have my own lawyer look them over, just for my peace of mind. Mr. Abernathy, our old family lawyer, he would know what to do." It was the perfect ruse. Mr. Abernathy had retired and moved to Florida 5 years ago, a fact they knew but would see my forgetting of as just another sign of my decline. Victoria's smile was condescendingly sweet. "Of course, Beatrice, that is a wonderful idea," she said, exchanging a look with James that clearly communicated, "Let the old woman have her harmless little fantasy. Why do you not go ahead and call him? Use the phone in the study. Take all the time you need." She thought she was humoring me. In reality, she was handing me the very weapon I needed. I went into the study and closed the door. I looked up the number for the real Mr. Abernathy's old defunct office to complete my performance. But the number I dialed was the one Arthur had carefully printed at the bottom of his letter. The voice that answered was not the folksy drawl of an old family lawyer. It was sharp, clear, and all business. "Marcus Thorne." "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice low and urgent. "My name is Beatrice Holloway. My late husband, Arthur Holloway, recommended I speak with you. I am in a great deal of trouble." I met him the next day. Getting out of the house required another performance, this time a tearful insistence on visiting Arthur's grave alone. It was a request so steeped in grief that even Victoria could not refuse it without looking like a monster. Marcus Thorne's office was in a sleek modern building downtown, a world away from the dusty, book-lined offices of my past. He was a man in his late 40s, his energy a palpable force in the minimalist room. He was a litigator, a fighter, and his eyes missed nothing. I did not cry. I did not ramble. I laid out the facts as clearly as I could, and then I placed Arthur's letter on the polished surface of his desk. He read it in silence, his expression unreadable. When he was done, he looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something beyond professional interest. I saw a warrior's respect. "Your husband was a brilliant man, Mrs. Holloway," he said. "This letter is a prosecutor's dream. It establishes motive and a clear pattern of conspiracy. But," he added, his tone hardening, "a defense attorney will try to paint it as the paranoid ramblings of a dying, medicated man. It is a powerful start, but it is not enough. We need more. We need hard, current evidence of their fraud and their intentions. We need to catch them with their hands in the proverbial cookie jar." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "This is going to be difficult and dangerous. Your home is now enemy territory. From this moment on, you are no longer just a grieving widow. You are my lead operative, and your first task is to convince them that you are utterly and completely defeated." I went home that afternoon with a clear mission. I had to become the woman my sons and daughter-in-law already believed me to be. I had to inhabit the role of a grieving, confused, and compliant fool. My performance began that very evening. I apologized to them for being so difficult about the house sale. My conversation with old Mr. Abernathy helped me see things more clearly. I lied, my voice watery with feigned emotion. He agreed with you. Arthur would want me to be practical. You are right. This is for the best. The relief on their faces was a sickening spectacle. James puffed out his chest, the victorious son. Samuel looked at me with grateful, tear-filled eyes. Victoria's smile was one of pure, triumphant satisfaction. They had won. They had finally broken the stubborn old woman. In the weeks that followed, I played my part to perfection. I became a ghost in my own home, shuffling from room to room with a lost expression. I would ask them the same questions about the closing date or the investment multiple times a day, feigning a memory that was shot to pieces. In reality, I was using these conversations as a form of interrogation, gathering details, confirming timelines, and getting them to repeat their lies. They grew careless. Their conversations in front of me became more open, more brazen. They would discuss the investment, the offshore accounts Victoria was setting up, the plans for the money, all while I sat in my armchair, seemingly lost in a fog of grief. They had no idea the confused old woman in the corner was a recording device, absorbing their every self-incriminating word. Marcus knew that my testimony, even backed by Arthur's letter, was not enough. We needed their own voices, their own actions, captured and preserved. A week after our first meeting, a large, beautiful floral arrangement was delivered to the house. The card read, "Thinking of you in this difficult time, an old friend from the university." Victoria, ever the snob, admired the expensive orchids and placed the arrangement on the large console table in the living room, the central hub of the house where they often took their phone calls and had their evening drinks. She did not notice that nestled deep within the lush foliage, perfectly camouflaged, was a tiny, high-fidelity audio recorder. The next gift was a sleek, modern digital clock, which I presented to James and Victoria for the home office they had set up in Arthur's old study. "I saw this online," I said with a vague, pathetic smile. "I thought it would be useful for you, for all your important work." Victoria, pleased, placed it on the corner of the desk, giving its pinhole camera a perfect, unobstructed view of her computer, her phone, and every document she placed on the desk. The final tool was for me, a simple, elegant fountain pen. It was also a video camera. I would carry it with me, and in my meetings with them and the real estate agents, I would click it on, capturing their faces, their condescending smiles, their confident lies. My house was no longer a home. It had become a stage, and it was wired for sound and video. The final act of our family tragedy was about to be recorded for posterity. The evidence I gathered was a daily education in the banality of evil. Each night, after the house was quiet, I would retreat to my room, lock the door, and begin the harvest. I would retrieve the memory card from the orchid planter and listen through a tiny earpiece. I heard Victoria on the phone with her bankers in the Cayman Islands, discussing the best way to structure the offshore accounts to be invisible to U.S. tax authorities. I heard James bragging to a friend about the killing he was about to make, dismissing my grief as a temporary inconvenience. The most painful recordings were of Samuel. I heard his weak, guilty protests. "Are you sure this is right, James? It feels like we are robbing her." And I heard James's sharp, dismissive replies. "It is not robbing. It is restructuring. We are saving her from herself. Now stop being so sentimental." I heard my gentler son's conscience being systematically dismantled by his brother's greed. The forensic accountant Marcus had hired was making his own progress. He confirmed what Arthur had suspected. The Green Tech Fund was a fiction. It was a shell company with a mailing address in Delaware, and its sole officer was a woman named Victoria Lawson, her maiden name. It was pure, unadulterated fraud. The camera in the clock captured her, forging my signature on financial transfer documents. The pen I carried recorded a meeting with the real estate lawyer where Victoria and James instructed him that all proceeds from the sale were to be wired directly to their new investment company, a directive they claimed came from me. I meticulously labeled and uploaded every file to the secure server Marcus had created. It was a grim, painful task. Listening to my own sons plot the theft of my life was a form of torture. But with every recording, with every document, my resolve hardened. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was a historian, an archivist, and the curator of the evidence that would send my own children to prison. The house sale proceeded with terrifying speed. Victoria, in her element, had found a cash buyer, another of her shell companies, designed to purchase the house quickly and undervalue it for tax purposes. A closing date was set for just 3 weeks away. The date loomed over me, a ticking clock marking the seconds until my home, my past, and my future would be legally stolen. I had to maintain my performance, a feat of emotional endurance that drained me to my core. I went to meetings with the lawyers, my face a mask of vague, pleasant confusion. I signed preliminary documents, my hand shaking just enough to be convincing. The day before the final closing, Marcus called me on a secure line. "We have them, Beatrice," he said, his voice grim but satisfied. "We have enough evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and elder financial abuse to put them away for a very long time. The district attorney is ready to move." "What now?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Now," he said. "We let them walk into the trap. Let them believe they have won. We let them go to the closing tomorrow. The DA wants to catch them in the final act, with the signed papers and the wired money. My team and the police will be waiting. It is time to end this." I looked around the beautiful, memory-filled room I had shared with Arthur for 45 years. I looked at the boxes that lined the walls, filled with the life we had built. Tomorrow, I would have to walk into an office and sign away my home, but I would not be walking in as a victim. I would be walking in as the bait in a trap that was about to snap shut with the force of all the love I had lost and all the justice I was about to reclaim. The morning of the closing was unnaturally beautiful. A soft golden light filtered through the live oaks of Charleston, making the Spanish moss glow. It felt like a cruel joke from the universe. This perfect day chosen for the gutting of my life. I dressed with the slow, deliberate care of a soldier preparing for a final, uncertain battle. My hands were steady. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I took one last walk through the house, a silent farewell to the 45 years of memories held within its walls. I touched the worn spine of Arthur's favorite armchair. I ran my hand along the height chart in the kitchen that marked our son's journey from toddlers to men. This was not just a house. It was the archive of our love, our family. And I was about to sign it over to the very people who had defiled its memory. The car ride to the lawyer's office downtown was a masterclass in suffocating tension. I sat in the back with Samuel, who stared out the window, his face pale and miserable. In the front, James drove while Victoria narrated their imminent victory, her voice a smooth, triumphant purr. "The wire transfer will be complete by 3 o'clock," she said, scrolling through her phone. "I have already instructed the fund managers. The initial buy-in will be locked in by morning. It is all moving perfectly." She turned and gave me a brilliant, condescending smile in the rearview mirror. "You see, Beatrice? A new secure beginning for all of us. No more worrying about leaky roofs and property taxes. Arthur would be so relieved." I met her gaze in the mirror and held it, my expression a carefully constructed mask of frail, sad acceptance. Inside, Arthur's final word to me echoed like a drumbeat. Fight. The law office was a place of hushed, expensive power. We were shown into a large conference room on the top floor, with a panoramic view of the Charleston harbor. The air was cool and smelled of leather and money. The closing attorney, a man named Mr. Davies, was already there, along with two anonymous-looking people, who were introduced as the buyer's representatives. They were, I knew, agents of Victoria's Shell Company. The documents were a formidable, pristine stack in the center of the vast mahogany table. Mr. Davies began to walk through them, his voice a droning monotone of legal jargon. I played my part to perfection. I was the confused, grieving widow. I would interrupt him with vague, tangential questions. "Is this the part Arthur used to call the thingamajig?" I would ask, my voice trembling slightly. Victoria would jump in, her tone one of infinite, weary patience. "It is the title insurance, Beatrice. We have been over this. It just protects the new owners," she would explain, patting my hand as if I were a child. James would sigh, a sound of profound exasperation mixed with familial duty. "Mom, just sign where he shows you. Victoria and I have read everything. It is all standard." They were so confident, so arrogant. They saw me as a final, tedious hurdle to be cleared before they could claim their prize. They had no idea that the room was a stage, the documents were props, and the final act of this tragedy had been written not by them, but by their father. The moment arrived. Mr. Davies slid the final signature page in front of me. "If you will just sign here, Mrs. Holloway, the transaction will be complete." All eyes were on me. I could feel their collective will pushing me, a physical force. Victoria was smiling, a predator who could already taste the kill. James leaned forward, his eagerness a palpable thing. I picked up the heavy, expensive-looking pen. I uncapped it. I held it over the signature line where my name was typed. And then I set it down. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The quiet hum of anticipation was replaced by a tense, confused silence. "Mom," James said, his voice sharp with irritation. "What is it?" I did not look at him. I looked directly at Victoria. The mask of the frail, forgetful old woman fell away, and my voice when I spoke was not weak or confused. It was cold, clear, and steady. "Before I sign," I said, "I have a few questions. About the buyer, a company called Palmetto Holdings, LLC. A shell company, I believe, registered in Delaware. Its sole officer is a woman named Victoria Lawson. Your maiden name, is it not?" The color drained from Victoria's face. James stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. "And I have a question about the green tech fund this money is supposedly being invested in," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "My own research indicates that it does not exist. It is another shell, another fiction, much like the one you used in the Bristol case in Virginia 5 years ago." "What are you talking about?" James stammered, looking frantically between me and his wife. "Ask your wife," I said. "Ask her about the trust she managed for the elderly Bristol family. Ask her how their entire fortune disappeared into an emerging markets fund. just before Mr. Bristol's convenient fatal heart attack. This was the secret Marcus's investigators had uncovered. This was not her first time. "This is absurd," Victoria hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper. "Your mother is having a psychotic episode. She is delusional." "Am I?" I asked. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. My husband was a historian. He was a meticulous archivist of the truth, and he was a witness to your entire conspiracy. I opened the letter. The room was so quiet I could hear the frantic, shallow sound of Victoria's breathing. "This is a letter my husband, Arthur Holloway, wrote in the final weeks of his life," I announced to the stunned room. "I would like to read a few passages." I looked down at his familiar, shaky script. "To my darling Beatrice," I began. "If you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and the battle has fallen to you. Do not grieve for me, my love. Grieve for our sons. I have spent these last months as a silent witness in my own home, and what I have seen has broken my heart. I have seen the naked greed in James's eyes, a sickness I never knew was there. I have seen the tragic weakness in Samuel, who knows this is wrong, but lacks the courage to stand against his brother." I paused, looking at my sons. James was pale, his confident smirk gone. Samuel had buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I continued reading Arthur's words. "But they are merely soldiers. The general is Victoria. I have listened to her on the phone, her voice a poison of false sympathy and cold calculation. She speaks of our home not as a place of memory, but as an underperforming asset. She speaks of you not as a mother, but as an obstacle. The investment they have proposed is a fiction, a web of lies designed for one purpose, to steal the life's work we built together. She is not building a future for our family, she is funding her own escape." I looked up from the letter, my eyes locking with Victoria's. "He saw you," I said softly. "He saw you for exactly what you are." Samuel let out a choked, agonized cry. "He knew," he sobbed. "Oh God, Dad knew what we were doing." Victoria, seeing her carefully constructed world collapsing, made a final, desperate move. She was not a fighter. She was a creature of paper and lies. She lunged not at me, but at the documents on the table, grabbing for Arthur's letter, for the closing papers, for anything she could destroy. "You will not ruin me," she shrieked, her voice a raw, ugly sound of pure panic. James, jolted into action, also reached for the papers, trying to help her. It was a pathetic, frantic scramble, a desperate struggle not of bodies, but of criminals trying to shred the evidence of their crimes. But before they could rip a single page, the conference room door opened. Marcus Thorne stood in the doorway. He was not alone. Two grim-faced, professional-looking people, a man and a woman, stood behind him. They were detectives. "It is over, Victoria," Marcus said, his voice calm and final. Victoria froze, her hand hovering over the letter. A wild, cornered look entered her eyes. "And just so you know," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity and strength I did not know I possessed, as I tapped the elegant silver brooch on my lapel. "This entire conversation, from the moment we sat down, has been recorded. The district attorney's office has been listening to every single word." That was the final blow. The fight went out of them completely. As the detectives stepped forward and quietly asked James and Victoria to stand, the alliance that had been so strong, so unified in its greed, shattered. "This was your idea," James snarled at his wife, his face a mask of ugly, fearful blame. "Your whole stupid, risky scheme." "My scheme?" Victoria laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "You were practically drooling at the thought of the money. You were the one who convinced your weak-willed little brother to go along with it. I could never have done it without you, you greedy, pathetic fool." They were still spitting venom at each other as the detectives led them from the room. Samuel, a broken, sobbing wreck, did not even look up. Marcus Thorne walked over to me. He gently took the pen from the table, capped it, and placed it in my hand. "I believe this is yours, Mrs. Holloway," he said with a small, respectful smile. I stood up and looked out the window at the harbor, at the sunlight glittering on the water. The battle was over. The truth, the story my husband had so carefully preserved, had finally been told. Justice had arrived. The chaos of the law office conference room was a sharp, ugly contrast to the quiet dignity of the rest of the building. As my sons and my daughter-in-law were led away in handcuffs, a profound, shocking silence descended. The closing attorney and the buyer's representatives, all stunned witnesses to a drama they had not auditioned for, were giving hushed, frantic statements to other officers in the hallway. Marcus Thorne gently guided me to a chair. The adrenaline that had coursed through me, that had given me the strength to confront them, drained away, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I looked at the closing documents still spread across the mahogany table, the final page bearing only the faint indentation of where I had almost signed my life away. The ride home was a silent one, with Marcus driving my car. The for sale sign on the lawn looked like a cruel joke, a relic from a battle that had just been won at an unimaginable cost. The house, when I stepped inside, did not feel like a reclaimed sanctuary. It felt like a tomb, a place of profound and painful endings. The first few days were a blur. The news of the arrests had exploded within our small community. My phone rang incessantly with calls from shocked friends and family, their voices a chorus of apology and disbelief. They had all been fooled by Victoria's masterful performance, and their guilt was a palpable thing. I was too tired to offer them absolution. Samuel was released on bail 2 days later. His immediate and total cooperation with the district attorney, his only saving grace. James and Victoria were denied bail, deemed flight risks. Samuel came to the house. He stood on the porch, a broken, hollowed-out version of the boy I had raised, and he wept. He did not ask to come inside. He just stood there and apologized, his words a torrent of shame and self-loathing, until he had nothing left to say. I listened, my heart a cold, still place. And when he was done, I simply said, "Go home, Samuel." I could not offer him comfort. The wound was too raw, the betrayal too deep. The legal process was a slow, grinding machine, but it was thorough. The evidence we had gathered was overwhelming. The secret audio recordings were the centerpiece of the trial. The jury listened, spellbound, as the story of the conspiracy unfolded in the conspirators' own voices. Victoria's cold, confident instructions, James's enthusiastic greed, and Samuel's weak, reluctant complicity. The forensic accountant that Marcus had hired presented a devastating, airtight case, tracing the flow of my money through Victoria's fraudulent shell companies. The investigators Marcus had hired testified about Victoria's history, painting a picture of a career predator. But the most powerful moment of the trial was when Arthur's letter was read into the court record by a stoic, impassive clerk. The courtroom was utterly silent as my husband's words, written from his deathbed, echoed in the hall. It was a voice of unimpeachable truth from beyond the grave, a father's final, heartbreaking testimony against his own sons. As the clerk read Arthur's words of disillusionment and shame, I saw that James, for the first time, finally seemed to grasp the true magnitude of his betrayal. He bowed his head and wept. The verdicts were a formality. Victoria, the mastermind, was found guilty on all charges, including conspiracy to commit grand larceny and felony financial elder abuse. She was sentenced to 15 years in a federal prison, the maximum allowed. James, as her primary accomplice, received a sentence of 7 years. Samuel, because of his full confession and his testimony against his brother and sister-in-law, received 5 years of probation, a ruined reputation, and a lifetime of community service. Justice had been served. The ledger, as Arthur would have said, had been balanced. In the quiet aftermath of the trial, I was left to survey the ruins of my family. My relationship with my sons was a smoldering wreckage. James wrote me letters from prison, at first full of anger and blame, then slowly, over many months, evolving into a kind of grudging, remorseful acceptance of his own guilt. I read them, but I did not reply. Samuel tried to rebuild. He would come by the house, offering to do yard work, to fix the leaky faucet, to do anything, however small, to atone. He was a man consumed by a deep and abiding shame. I allowed his presence, but I kept my heart guarded. The easy, unconditional love of a mother was gone, and in its place was a cautious, wounded tenderness. "I will never be able to forgive myself," he told me one afternoon, as we sat on the piazza. "I know," I said, "and I cannot simply grant you forgiveness, Samuel. That is not how it works. It is not a gift I can give you to make you feel better. It is something you have to build within yourself by living an honorable life from this day forward. Respect is the first step. Forgiveness is a distant destination I cannot yet see. He understood. He stopped apologizing and started the quiet, difficult work of becoming a man his father would have respected. Our relationship began its slow, painful process of being rebuilt, not on the soft ground of sentiment, but on the hard, unyielding bedrock of truth. The first thing I did after the legal battles were over was take the for sale sign off my lawn. Then I called a contractor, but I did not sell the house. I renovated it. I could not let Victoria's tainted memory be the final chapter in the story of the home Arthur and I had built, so I remade it. I painted over the colors she had chosen. I sold the furniture they had pressured me to buy. I let in the light. The house, like me, was a survivor, and I was determined to give it a new life. I found a new life for myself as well. I reconnected with the friends and colleagues I had been isolated from. I began to travel, something Arthur and I had always planned to do. I went to Florence and stood before the masterpieces I had only ever taught from books. I went to Paris and walked the quiet halls of the Louvre. With a portion of the money I had saved from the sale that never was, I established a scholarship in Arthur's name at the university, a fund for promising history students. At the art museum downtown, I began to volunteer, leading tours and giving lectures. The art historian in me, so long dormant, came back to life. I had found my own purpose, a life that was not defined by my role as a wife or a mother, but by my own passions and my own strength. I am sitting on my piazza this morning, a cup of tea in my hand. It is September 28th, a date that is forever marked in my heart, the anniversary of Arthur's passing. The Charleston air is soft and warm, and the garden he loved is in full glorious bloom. Samuel is coming for lunch today. Our visits are quiet and sometimes still a little sad, but they are real. He is a good man, a man Arthur would be proud of now. James is due to be released from prison next year. I do not know what our relationship will be. Some ruins can never be fully rebuilt. I often think of Arthur's letter, of his final, loving lesson. As a historian, I know that the past is never truly past. It is a constant presence, an underdrawing that shapes the surface of our present. The betrayal I endured is a part of my story, a dark layer of paint on my life's canvas, but it is not the final layer. I have learned that love is not a blind faith. It is not an unconditional surrender. True love, the kind that lasts a lifetime and beyond, has a backbone. It is a partnership of respect. It demands honesty. It requires the courage to see the truth, even when it is ugly, and the strength to fight for it. Arthur's last act was not just a warning. It was an act of profound and trusting love. He trusted me to be strong enough to fight the battle, and in winning it, I did not just save our home. I saved myself. The house is quiet now, but it is not empty. It is full of a hard-won and unbreakable peace.